Hi, welcome to my channel Scramble Scraps. I'm Sophie and this is the first video in my How to Crochet series. This video will cover the basics of getting started with crochet, including the tools you'll need and the types of projects that you can expect to make. I'll also be telling you some of the tips and tricks that I've picked up in the many years that I have been crocheting myself. Specifically, today's tutorial will cover the types of yarn that you might find, the types of projects you can make with those different types of yarn, and the tools you'll need to do this. Before starting with a crochet project, you need to decide on the type of things that you actually want to make. Now, crochet projects tend to fall into two categories. You either have toys and key rings, like these, or you have blankets. The main difference between these two projects is blankets are worked in rows, whereas toys are worked in rounds. So all this means, in the case of a blanket for instance, is we work across our first row, and then we turn our work around and then work backwards. And we build up our project row by row, and we can stop adding rows once our project reaches the length that we want. Whereas with toys, these are worked in rounds. So this means that we work in a circle, and typically with these toys you actually work in a continuous spiral. And the shape of our toys comes from varying the number of stitches in each of those rounds. Both of these types of projects can be really fun to make. As a beginner, I would recommend starting with a blanket because this will give you a foundation to learn all of the stitches without having to also worry about the fiddly aspects of sewing pieces together and embroidering on features. The next thing you'll need to decide is what type of yarn do you want to use. There are many different weights of yarn. You can get from baby weight yarns all the way up to super chunky yarns. The chunkier the yarn, the quicker it will work up into a project, but also the thicker your project will be. Generally though, most common projects call for three main types of yarn weight, where we have double knit, Aran and chunky. So these are all from the Paint Box range of yarns, so you can get these from lovecrafts.com, and this is their seafoam blue colour. Double knit I personally like to use for things like these toys. It's a bit thinner and so it makes it easier for you to get those details that you need when you're making the toys. Aran and chunky I like to use for blankets. Chunky will give you a very nice thick blanket, as the name suggests. Aran I find is a compromise between the softness that you would get with the chunky yarn, but then also it's not as heavy. If you're making a blanket for a baby, you want something that's a little bit lighter, and I think Aran weight yarn is perfect for that. You also want to consider the material that your yarn is made from. All of these three yarns are made from acrylic wool. This is really hard wearing wool, really easy to wash, and very robust. So this is ideal if you're giving it to a baby, where it will obviously need to be washed many times. When it comes to making key rings, like this little guy here, I prefer to use a cotton-based yarn like this Catania yarn. This yarn is less prone to fuzziness than its acrylic counterparts, and so I feel like it stands the test of time a little better when you have it on something like your keys, where it's being constantly thrown about a bag, pulled in and out, and it has to undergo quite a lot of stress. Having now decided on the type of project you want to make and the yarn that you're going to use, we also need to decide what hook we're going to use. Now, the hooks themselves come in many different shapes and sizes, and the yarn that you decide to use will tell you the recommended hook size for that particular yarn. There's nothing to say though that you can't go slightly bigger or slightly smaller, but this is a guideline as the hook size that they would suggest you use. Generally speaking, the thicker the yarn, the bigger your hook you're going to need, and again, the quicker your project will work up. So for toys and for things like this, you want to use a smaller hook because you want to get more detail, but for a blanket, if you want it to be quite chunky, you'll use a larger hook. Now, in terms of the actual hooks to choose from, commonly you have these standard aluminium hooks, fairly commonplace. You should be able to find them in most good craft stores, and they're relatively inexpensive. You can also find these bamboo hooks. So these are lighter than the aluminium hooks, and it comes down to personal preference over which you prefer. I personally actually prefer my hook to have a little more weight to it, but that's just me. And finally we come to my favourite hooks. So these are from the Clover and More range of hooks. This is the 4mm hook. So these are very similar to the aluminium hook, except they have a handle on them. So it makes them more comfortable to hold over time. Initially this isn't crucial, but when I first started learning to crochet, I found that if I crocheted for a long period of time, I'd end up with a blister. It can also just be how I hold the hook, but if you grip your hooks quite tightly like I do, you may find that over time you'll develop a bit of a sore on your finger. So if you decide that crochet is something you want to pursue and you want to continue with, I strongly recommend buying a hook with some kind of handle. It'll be better for your hands, it'll be much more comfortable, and these hooks are also just generally higher quality. They glide through the yarn much better, and less friction makes for better tension and better final projects. Having chosen your hooks, the final things you're going to need are sewing needles so that you can sew in the ends at the end of your project. Now these come both plastic and metal. The plastic ones obviously aren't as durable as the metal ones, but they both do the job, and again it's personal preference. Obviously the plastic ones are also cheaper. Now some people don't like them because they're not as durable as the metal, but again, this is up to you. The only thing to bear in mind is whatever needle you do choose needs to have a relatively large eye because you've got to be able to thread through yarn. But again, good craft stores will have an ample range to choose from. In terms of little additions for your crochet, stitch markers can come in very handy. So these are how you mark either rows or how many chains you've made, and something I'll come to in my later videos, but they're actually especially useful if you decide to go down the route of making toys. Because like I said previously, these are worked in continuous rounds, it's very easy to lose where you start each round. So by attaching in a stitch marker you can mark the starting point of each of those rounds, and it just allows you to keep track of where you are in the pattern. You can also as well use a row counter. Again, you can get these in those good craft stores, and it allows you to keep track of your rows. Now that you know what project you want to make, the yarn that you need and the tools that you're going to use to get started, you're now ready to start with your first crochet project. In my next video I'm going to be showing you how to make a slip knot and foundation chain, and this is what will form the basis of most crochet blankets. If you like this video and you want to see more, then please do subscribe to my channel, and also leave me a note in the comments if there are any other techniques, stitches, tools you'd like to see a video on for next time. In the meantime, happy crocheting, and I'll be back very soon.